Today, we'll delve into the story that took place in Oklahoma. On August 8, 2012, the sheriff of Garvin County received a call from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. The latter said they were contacted by a resident named Van Emblem, who reported seeing something horrific. As he believed, he witnessed the disposal of the body and an attempt to hide all the evidence. Emblem said that the night before the call, his friend, on whose ranch he has been working for 4 years, asked him for help. When he arrived at the ranch, a friend admitted he needed help to get rid of the body. At first, Van thought it was a joke. However, when he saw the plastic buckets with red stains, he realized it wasn't a joke at all. Since the buckets were heavy, his friend needed help loading them into a pickup truck. Before realizing he could become an accomplice to the crime, Van helped his friend. Coming to his senses, he left, telling his friend to deal with all this alone. Over the next few hours, Van contacted a lawyer who convinced him the only way out of this situation would be to call the police. After all, if it became known later that he knew about the crime but did not report it to the authorities, he would be prosecuted as an accomplice. Brandon Duran was born in 1980 in San Diego, California. Brandon's father was an ardent motorcyclist and a former member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, which the FBI considers a criminal organization, the second largest in the world after the Hells Angels. His parents divorced when he was around 10 years old. However, they maintained good relations, equally partaking in their son's upbringing. His father's love of motorcycles gradually passed to Brandon. At 25, he had his own motorcycle, which he assembled by hand and treasured dearly. He often spent time with other bikers, but did not belong to any motorcycle club. The unexpected death of Brandon's father on April 2005 was very challenging for him. Trying to beat the growing depression, Brandon decided to change something in his life. He sat on a motorcycle and drove to Las Vegas. Living in Vegas for about a year, Brandon met 24-year-old Amber Andrews, whose company made him forget all the problems. A whirlwind romance between them resulted in marriage 2 months after they met. By this time, Amber was pregnant. In December 2006, she gave birth to Brandon's son, Brando. The birth of a child was a crucial change in Brandon's life. He became a caring father and husband who worked at a high-paying job and chose family over his interests. However, one couldn't say the same about Amber. As if not noticing the birth of a child, she remained loyal to her lifestyle, constantly hanging out at biker gatherings and various parties. Thus, relations in the young family started deteriorating rapidly. Sometimes it even came to fights. Undoubtedly, the only outcome of this was a divorce, filed 4 years after the wedding. Brandon received full custody of the child. After all, unlike Amber, he could provide for both himself and his son. After the divorce finalization in 2010, Amber returned to her hometown of Meeker in Oklahoma, and Brandon went home to San Diego with his son. He was happy to be reunited with his family, who later helped him raise a child. Gradually, the emotional wounds from a failed marriage began to heal, and Brandon was again optimistic about the future. However, while thinking about the future, the past knocked on his door. In the summer of 2012, he saw Amber on his doorstep. His ex-wife wanted to reunite, asking him to give their relationship another chance. The feelings that Brandon tried to suppress so diligently resurfaced. He believed in the sincerity of his ex-wife and agreed to a fresh start. In September, their son Brando was supposed to go to kindergarten, and Amber asked the three of them to go to Oklahoma to visit her parents, who wanted to see their grandson. Brandon agreed, and they started preparing for the trip, planning to stay in Oklahoma for about a week. A few days before Brandon, Amber, and their sons returned to San Diego, Van Emblem contacted the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. Van reported that his friend and employer asked for help to get rid of the body, saying that it was the body of Brandon Duran. The person who asked for Van's help was 30-year-old Justin Hammer from Garvin County. After receiving a call from the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation about the possible crime, the local sheriff and his assistant immediately went to the ranch owned by Hammer. Moreover, after calling Brandon's relatives from San Diego, the authorities found out Brandon was out of reach for several days. Until confirming the information provided by Van, they decided not to disclose the details of this case to Brandon's family. To the surprise of detectives, during questioning, Justin quickly confessed to murdering Brandon Duran. However, there was one crucial moment. Hammer said he acted in self-defense and described Duran as a dangerous motorcycle gang member who threatened him. According to him, on August 7th, Brandon drove up to his house on a motorcycle, kicked out the door with his foot, went inside, and started threatening him. Hammer claimed to have an intimate connection with Amber, which became the reason for Brandon's unexpected visit. As Hammer reported, Brandon threatened him, saying he must disappear from Amber's life, promising he'd ask his biker friends to help him disappear forever, and mentioning his relatives would also perish if he disobeyed. Allegedly, Hammer grabbed a shotgun standing in the corner of the room and fired it after these words. Realizing that Brandon was dead, he got afraid of retribution from the Bandidos Motorcycle Club and therefore did not call the police, deciding to hide all the evidence instead. Justin moved the body to the bathroom where he disposed of it using a saw, 5 5-gallon buckets, and cement. According to Hammer's statement, he couldn't load the buckets into the pickup truck on his own due to their weight added by cement. Hence, he asked for assistance from his friend Van, who helped him load buckets into a pickup truck, but then left and turned him over to the police. Hammer's ranch had a small pond into which he threw the buckets. After dealing with the body, he began cleaning the house. He later burned the supplies, gloves, and rags he used for cleaning. As Hammer claimed, he gave Brandon's motorcycle to his relative. At the same time, Hammer stressed that his relative didn't know about the bike's origin and disassembled it for spare parts. After all 5 buckets were lifted from the bottom of the pond, the officers went to Meeker to tell Amber the sad news. The woman was in shock after learning about the death of her child's father. She said they divorced, but planned to start living together again. Amber also mentioned she fought with Brandon the day before because he found out about her relationship with Justin Hammer. After the argument, Brandon got on a motorcycle and left, saying he would deal with her lover himself, and one would say that such a version of events seemed believable. However, soon there was a new development in the case. Criminologists that worked in Hammer's house started discovering new evidence that cast doubt on his testimony. Justin said Brandon kicked the door down and entered the house, while in fact, someone kicked the door from the inside. The shoe print left on the door matched the footprint of Hammer's sneakers, which indicated Justin was the one who knocked down the door. In addition to the pistol and shotgun, they found a list of items needed to dispose of the body in the gun safe. It could indicate that the crime was not spontaneous, and Hammer was preparing for it in advance. Apart from the 5 buckets, they removed a doghouse from the pond. Filled with cement, it contained fragments that did not fit into buckets. Based on this evidence, Justin Hammer was charged with first-degree murder. The forensic medical expert had a difficult job: to analyze 25 separate fragments of Duran's body. An autopsy showed that Brandon was shot 4 times in the head, 3 times with a pistol and once with a shotgun. Moreover, according to the expert, the shotgun shot was the last one. By this time, Brandon was presumably dead and lying on the floor. However, it contradicted the testimony of Hammer, who stated he fired only once and from a shotgun. But it didn't make any sense to the investigators. The question arose, why did Hammer need to use a shotgun after firing a pistol 3 times? Especially since Brandon was already dead. This evidence suggested that someone else besides Hammer could be involved in the crime. The investigators' call to Brandon's mother, Cindy, about her son's death left the woman dumbstruck. After coming to her senses, Cindy clarified that Brandon had never been a member of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. As she said, Brandon's father passed on his love for motorcycles to his son, but it never turned into something more. But there was another curious moment in Cindy's story. She said Brandon's bike was broken when he left for Oklahoma. He loaded it into the back of his pickup truck, hoping to fix it in Oklahoma. Moreover, Cindy said her son didn't like conflict situations, mentioning that his ex-wife Amber was a source of all his problems. Her unfaithfulness overshadowed their relationship from the very beginning. After all, even after the birth of her son, Amber stayed loyal to her lifestyle. and when Brandon would express his disapproval of her behavior, she would start a fistfight. All this eventually led to a divorce that resulted in Brandon receiving full custody of their son, which made Amber furious. Next, she disappeared for more than a year, uninterested in her son's life. Hence, when she suddenly appeared and asked for a second chance, Brandon and the rest of his family were astonished. After learning all this information, including that Justin Hammer and Amber were lovers, the investigators decided to study Brandon's ex-wife more closely. Amber told police that Brandon left on a motorcycle after the argument. However, his family claimed it was broken. The question arose, if the breakage was not severe, why would Brandon take the motorcycle to Oklahoma instead of fixing it at home? And as for Amber, she never mentioned that Brandon was fixing it. She also claimed that she went to a doctor's appointment after Brandon set off to deal with Hammer. And yet the police found no evidence she was in any of the city's medical facilities that day. All this meant Amber had no alibi. Detectives later discovered that Amber asked her friend to babysit her son on the day of Brandon's death. When her friend arrived around 3 p.m., Amber and Brandon left the house together. They drove in Brandon's pickup truck with a motorcycle in the back. Amber left her phone at home and didn't return until 8 hours later. However, when she finally did, neither Brandon nor his motorcycle were in the truck. After accessing Amber's phone, investigators found a message received just before she and Brandon left the house. The text, sent by Justin Hammer, said, "The ink is ready." The investigators believed it was some secret code, meaning everything was ready to deal with Brandon. After interviewing Amber's close friends, detectives discovered she never wanted to get back together with her ex-husband and always spoke negatively about him. She hated Brandon for getting full custody of their son and for being a square. Soon the authorities found physical evidence that didn't reflect well on Amber's story. The forensic handwriting analysis confirmed that the note found in Hammer's safe, the one listing the items needed for body disposal, was written by Amber. And when the police got access to the CCTV cameras of the local hardware store, they learned the crime was planned and prepared in advance. The footage, taken the day before Brandon's death, shows Hammer buying buckets and other items from a list written by Amber. However, while awaiting trial, Hammer insisted he didn't have an accomplice and acted in self-defense. He was doing everything he could to protect Amber, who was still free. The man claimed that the items on Amber's list were needed to repair the house, not to get rid of the body. Furthermore, Hammer explained why he used two kinds of weapons, stating that he held a shotgun in one hand and a pistol in the other. Saying that investigators found this statement strange would be an understatement. In a trial many anticipated to last for several weeks, the jurors deliberated for about an hour and a half, returning with a recommended life sentence without parole. "We're very pleased with the verdict. We believe it was appropriate, and it's justice for Brandon Duran's family," said Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Austin. "We also think the sentence of life without parole is completely appropriate." "I am very happy at the jury's decision," said Cindy Ware, Duran's mother. "I'm sure it was very hard, and this is what I've been hoping for 2 years." In October 2014, Justin Hammer was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 2 months later, Amber was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of her ex-husband, desecrating the remains, and conspiracy to commit a felony. Amber pleaded not guilty, hoping she would get released on bail. "I've been fighting for 32 months to get my son home with me," Andrews said as she sat in the courtroom handcuffed and dressed in a light purple inmate suit. "My son has been home for exactly 1 month," she said. "If there's anything I can do to be at home with him until the trial." District Judge Jeff Virgin of Norman, in town to oversee a jury trial here, agreed with the state's request to deny a bond amount for Andrews. "With the nature of the allegations, this court finds that bond should be denied at this time," Virgin said. It took more than 2 years before the trial began in the spring of 2017. Amber pleaded not guilty, while her lawyers claimed the defendant was not at the crime scene. Prosecutors Christy Miller and Jennifer Austin argued that Andrews was the only person with a motive to kill Brandon Duran. According to Miller, Amber was the crime organizer who lured Brandon to her lover's house. There, Hammer shot him with a pistol 3 times, and Amber fired the last from the shotgun. Miller told the jury that all witness statements and evidence presented during the trial point to Amber's direct involvement in this crime. The only person who wanted him gone was her. The only person with motive is Amber Andrews. The only person who had a reason for him to be gone was her, Miller said. She not only needed him to be dead, she needed him to disappear. She had the motive and Hammer had the place to do it. They thought they had the perfect plan. As for that motive, Miller told jurors it was to push Duran out of the way so Andrews could regain custody of their young son. Considering she was absent from home for 8 hours on the day of Brandon's death and the lack of evidence to confirm her alibi, the prosecutor stated that Amber helped Hammer dispose of the body and clean the house. While unable to perform her parenting duties, she didn't want to give her son to a man she hated. And since she couldn't get custody of the child through the court, she decided to eliminate Brandon. However, the defense attorney Jay Mendros argued that the prosecutor's office provided no evidence of Amber's involvement in this case. "There's no evidence," Mendros said to jurors. "That's what you do when you have no evidence. They smear her character. What the state has is a theory, a conspiracy theory, but there's no evidence to prove it. She's not a cold-blooded killer. She did not plan this murder. Justin did this because he was afraid of losing Amber." Mendros called it a perfect recipe for disaster, with Duran coming to Oklahoma to get back together with Andrews, while Hammer, having dated Andrews for a year, was afraid of losing her to Duran. The defense attorney presented the following statements. Justin Hammer had every reason to kill Brandon Duran. It was a love triangle, a case about being torn between lovers. There is no black and white here. She went back and forth with both men. They took all the statements in here and twist and turn them and make them appear sinister. They're trying to put someone in prison on suspicion and innuendo. We don't convict people in this country on maybes. They do not have any evidence other than suspicions. That doesn't make her a conspirator or a murderer. Justin Hammer has confessed to this murder. He said he did it, and he did it alone. That is evidence that we do have. Jurors reached the guilty verdicts after hearing more than 4 hours of closing arguments in a Garvin County District courtroom. They recommended sentencing 35-year-old Amber Andrews to life in prison. Sentencing was scheduled for June 12, 2017. On this day, Amber appeared at the court hearing in a good mood. Brandon's mother, Cindy Ware, tearfully approached the witness stand to express her thoughts on how her son's death affected her and her grandson Brando. "You and your minions have taken away every dream I had ever had," Ware said after placing a photo of Duran next to the stand. "All Brandon wanted was his family, and you murdered him for it." "I'll never see that smile that brightens a room before Brandon even comes in. He won't get the chance to teach Brando how to snowboard." "You saw to that when you murdered him. If you did care about Brando, you wouldn't have murdered his father. You have to work for what you want, not murder for it. You wanted it, and would do anything you could to destroy it," she said, while at times pausing from her comments and looking up to stare intensely at Andrews, shaking her head up and down. "That is the work of the devil," Ware said, adding it's unspeakable what Andrews has done to her as Duran's mother. Before the judge's verdict, defense attorney Jay Mendros made another statement. "It's still the defense's position that there's nothing that ties her to this murder," Mendros told the judge. "There's no evidence that she was involved in this murder." "I would ask the judge to disregard the jury's verdict. We ask you set aside the jury's verdict and reset this case." Mendros argued the state's case was void of evidence and played on jurors' emotions to get the guilty verdict. They argued her into prison by guessing and speculation. There's no evidence. The state had nothing else but shock value. Amber Andrews was sentenced to life in prison without parole for the first-degree murder of Brandon Duran. In addition, she received 7 years for desecrating the remains and another 10 years for conspiracy to commit a felony. Justin Hammer is currently serving time at the Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAlester, Oklahoma, while Amber Andrews remains incarcerated at the Mabel Bassett Correctional Center in McLeod, Oklahoma. Since August 7, 2012, Brando has been in custody of the Oklahoma Department of Human Services, living in a foster family. After fighting the court system in January 2013, Brando was allowed to return to San Diego to live with his grandmother. But it wasn't a victory yet. It took Cindy 5 years before she was able to gain full custody of Brando. After the trial, she and her relatives told him the truth about the verdict and his mother.